Ethan Blackwell wasn't the kind of man who fell in love easily, and no one blamed him for it. At 38, he was the CEO of one of the largest private financial firms in New York. He was the definition of precision, sharp, calculated, and emotionally impenetrable. People said that if he ever had a heart, it had been locked away a long time ago. It was a Monday morning, a Manhattan skyscraper. Employees poured in like a rushing current. And right in the middle of it all stood Alisa Bennett, a new intern, clutching a laptop in one arm and a wobbly cup of coffee in the other. Then it happened. One clumsy misstep. Scalding coffee splashed across Ethan's charcoal gray suit. Her heel came down squarely on his polished Oxfords, and before she could even say, "I'm so sorry," the elevator jerked and froze. Stuck. No signal. No movement. Just the sound of shallow breathing and a pair of ice-cold eyes staring directly at her. 17 minutes. A fleeting moment, yet enough to crack a world no one thought could be moved. Before we begin the story, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Let's dive into the story together. Alisa Bennett had thought that morning was just a clumsy beginning, the kind of day you laugh about later, once it's safely behind you. But it wasn't just a stumble. It was a full performance. And she, without meaning to, had taken center stage. She didn't look like she belonged in that building, and certainly not in that elevator. Her scuffed sneakers squeaked against the marble floor, her light blue blouse was creased from her train ride, and the zipper on her canvas backpack had already given up the fight. Among the sharp suits and icy stares of New York's corporate elite, she was clearly the odd one out. She rushed in just before the doors closed, eyes wide, breathing fast, trying to juggle her coffee and laptop without dropping either. But fate, or gravity, had other plans. Her sneaker slipped. She bumped hard into someone's chest, warm coffee flying like a small explosion. The dark liquid soaked straight into a man's expensive charcoal suit. "Oh no, oh my God, I'm so sorry," she gasped, fumbling with a crumpled napkin from her pocket. She hadn't even looked up yet. But then, the elevator jolted. Hard, a mechanical groan, a flicker of the lights, and just like that, it stopped. Between floors. Sealed shut. Alisa froze. The silence hit first. Dense, awkward, loud in its own way, the kind of silence that tightens your chest. She slowly turned her eyes upward. And there he was. Ethan Blackwell. The Ethan Blackwell, CEO, the man whose name topped every company memo, whose photo had once graced the cover of Forbes under the headline, "Cold Precision." He wasn't just important. He was untouchable. She'd heard the rumors like everyone else. That he never raised his voice because he didn't need to. That he didn't smile because he didn't waste emotions. That no one ever saw him lose control. And here she was, standing 2 feet away, holding a dripping coffee cup and pressing a stained napkin against his chest. She felt her throat tighten, her fingers trembled. But then, something odd happened. In the middle of her panic, something bubbled up. That strange, nervous instinct she always had when things went horribly wrong. She cracked a joke. "Well," she muttered, half to herself, half to the elevator gods. "If this ends in disaster, at least I'll die in business casual." For a moment, she wished she could disappear into the carpet. But then, something even stranger happened. Ethan Blackwell smiled. It wasn't wide, it wasn't practiced. In fact, it looked like it had escaped from his face without permission, a twitch at the corner of his mouth, as if some long-dormant muscle had just woken up. It vanished just as quickly as it came. But Alisa saw it, and it stopped her cold. Not because she had been trying to impress him, she hadn't. She didn't even know who he was until 5 seconds ago. but because that tiny flicker of amusement from a man so famously unreadable felt like something cracked open. It wasn't a victory. It wasn't even a moment of connection. It was more like a ripple in still water. He had looked at her. Really looked at her. Not like a CEO scanning a resume, but like a person seeing someone unexpected, someone real, and not quite knowing what to do with that. She had no idea that in those 17 minutes, she had already done something no one else had managed in over a decade. She caught Ethan Blackwell off guard, and he would remember her for that. Not because she impressed him, not because she said the right thing, but because she didn't try to be anything other than exactly who she was. And somehow, that was what stayed with him. In the days that followed, Ethan Blackwell tried to go back to normal. He stuck to his routines: early meetings, cold press juices, quarterly forecasts, and decisive boardroom silence. Everything stayed in place: his tailored suits, his structured emails, his refusal to engage in small talk. And yet, something was off, not broken, just slightly out of rhythm. He found himself lingering longer in the hallway that led past the intern's corner. He never looked directly into the shared workspace, but his pace slowed, just enough for someone like him to notice. And then, quietly, he began to collect a set of unintentional observations. Alisa Bennett. The intern with the crooked ponytail and sneakers that squeaked on the marble. The one who typed too hard, laughed too loud, talked to the copy machine like it was a friend trying its best. And more importantly, she forgot he existed. Not deliberately, not out of disrespect, but out of being so fully herself, she simply didn't shift to fit the room. She didn't pause when he passed by. She didn't drop her voice when his name came up. She didn't wear the mask. While others spoke to him with curated words and expressions like laminated business cards, she remained unfiltered, absurdly honest, and often off-topic. She submitted financial spreadsheets with tab names like Budget Despair Revised, Death by Marketing Cuts, Profit, Questionable at Best. One document had an actual doodle of a sad face drawn next to the company's Q3 earnings. He should have been annoyed. He wasn't. He read the entire thing twice. Not for data. He already knew the numbers by heart. But to find her voice buried inside them. And there it was. Clear as ink. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was just trying to stay afloat. That thought unsettled him more than he cared to admit. Ethan had spent years building walls. Silent, invisible ones. They didn't shut people out so much as filter them, the way a soundproof room absorbs noise. And yet somehow, Alisa's presence leaked in. One Thursday night, long after the office had emptied, Ethan stayed behind. He said it was to review reports. He told himself it was to finish a call with Tokyo. But in truth, he didn't want to go home. The apartment was modern, sleek, and devoid of sound. Just like him. He walked past the fifth-floor conference room and froze. There she was. Alisa stood barefoot in the soft glow of the recessed lights, arms raised as if conducting a silent orchestra. A stack of papers clutched in one hand, the other tracing patterns through the air. She was dancing. Not gracefully, not professionally, but playfully, freely, as if no one had told her that the world was watching. Because maybe, deep down, she didn't believe it ever was. Her hair had slipped from its tie. Her blouse was half untucked. Her socks didn't match. And yet she moved like someone completely, unapologetically alive. Ethan didn't enter. He didn't speak. He didn't even exhale too loudly. He simply stood at the glass, one step removed, caught in a moment he had no part in, but somehow couldn't pull away from. There was something almost sacred about it. Not romantic, not yet, but real. Raw. Human. She was the opposite of everything he had curated around himself. Messy, emotional, transparent, and somehow he couldn't stop watching. She didn't know she was being seen. And maybe that was what made it matter most. That night, Ethan lay awake in his apartment, a penthouse high above the city, surrounded by quiet and glass and everything money could buy. He thought of her, not in grand gestures, not in fantasies, but in fragments. The way she smiled when no one asked her to, the way she forgot to edit herself, the way she filled space simply by existing, while he spent years perfecting the art of absence. She didn't belong in his world, which was exactly why he couldn't stop thinking about her. Ethan Blackwell didn't always keep people at arm's length. There was a time, years ago, when he believed in trust, in loyalty, even in love, though he'd never said it out loud. But that version of him no longer existed. He had buried that man beneath layers of caution, control, and cold clarity. Because once upon a time, someone he trusted had reached deep into the softest part of him and used it like a weapon. Her name was Claire. She had been everything the world admired: articulate, sharp, composed. Ethan met her during a high-stakes acquisition deal. They had worked late nights, shared glances that lingered, dinners that turned into long walks. And slowly, in a way that felt both inevitable and invisible, she became the one person he let in past the polished surface. But she hadn't come for love. She had come for access. Claire had taken everything she learned about him, his schedule, his communication habits, even the way he named his internal files, and used it to leak sensitive projections to a rival firm. She masked the betrayal so well that by the time the fallout began, Ethan was already labeled careless, compromised. The media loved it. Rising star in corporate freefall. Blackwell's blind spot. Investors didn't care about the truth. The board needed someone to blame. And although the truth eventually came out, too late, too quietly, Ethan was changed. Not just in public, in private. He stopped letting anyone close. No dates, no small talk. He didn't touch anything that felt unmeasured or unpredictable. His life became spreadsheets, quarterly earnings, and steel trap silence. People respected him, feared him, but no one knew him. And that was how he liked it. Until Alisa Bennett. Until the girl with the oversized backpack and the lopsided smile spilled coffee on him and didn't crumble in his presence. Until she called her report Budget Breakdown Panic Edition and danced barefoot in a dark conference room after hours. He didn't know what to do with her. She wasn't Claire. She wasn't like anyone, really. She didn't want anything from him. Didn't even seem to notice the weight of his last name. She talked to everyone the same, whether they were security guards or department heads. She made jokes at her own expense. She left little drawings in the margins of her printouts. She existed without calculation. And somehow, that was more terrifying than any boardroom threat he'd ever faced. Because she made him curious. Not in the way that demanded answers, but in the way that unsettled silence. She didn't try to impress him. She didn't perform. She simply showed up, day after day, completely herself. And he hated that he noticed. He hated it even more when he found himself waiting for it, watching for her in the break room, catching himself lingering on emails she'd written, reading and rereading the way she phrased things, like a person who had nothing to hide and no time to pretend. Ethan had spent years perfecting the art of distance. Alisa was undoing it without even trying, and the worst part wasn't that she might get close. The worst part was that some buried part of him was beginning to hope she would. The evening had begun like most corporate galas. Too much crystal, not enough sincerity. Ethan Blackwell, as always, was polished. Dark suit, no tie, whiskey in hand. He moved through the room like a man who belonged to it, nodding where appropriate, speaking only when necessary, already half tired of the evening before it properly began. Across the ballroom, under a string of golden chandeliers, Alisa Bennett stood nervously holding a glass of sparkling water and adjusting the hem of her dress for the 6th time. She wasn't supposed to be there. Interns didn't usually get invitations to investor dinners, but someone had dropped out, and her supervisor thought it would be a good experience. She hadn't even seen Ethan yet. He saw her first. Not because he was looking, but because she moved differently than everyone else in that room. While others glided, she wobbled slightly. While others smiled with their mouths, she smiled with her eyes. Her laugh stood out, unguarded, a little too loud, and refreshingly unrehearsed. He found himself watching her for a moment longer than he should have. The dinner was served, tables lined with immaculate plating, guests passing bread and exchanging hollow compliments. Ethan accepted his dish without looking twice. Shrimp risotto, presented like art. He took one bite, then paused. It started small, a slight itch behind his throat, the heat rising up his neck. His breath shortened, his chest tightened, the world blurred at the edges. He knew this feeling. The shellfish allergy he'd managed for years, the one he was always careful about. Except this time someone in catering had made a mistake, and no one noticed, at first. Across the table, the CFO asked him a question he didn't hear. One of the VPs chuckled about something irrelevant, and Ethan, always composed, tried to stand, but staggered. That's when Alisa saw him, noticed what no one else did, the color draining from his face, the sudden, shallow gasps, the way his hand gripped the edge of the table, not out of frustration but panic. Without thinking, she moved. Her heels clicked against the marble as she rushed past executives too stunned to react. She reached him as his knees buckled, catching his arm with both hands, her voice steady though her heart was racing. "EpiPen," she said to the nearest waiter. "He needs epinephrine." Now, no one moved. So she acted. Alisa dropped to her knees beside him, rummaging through his jacket with trembling but determined hands until she found the slim black case. She uncapped it, remembered the instructions. Right thigh, press, hold for 10 seconds. 1, 2, 3. His breath caught, then released. Ethan's body jolted slightly as the medication took hold. His eyelids fluttered, then opened fully. His breathing wasn't perfect, but it was there. Present. Alive. Paramedics arrived moments later, too late to save him, but just in time to take over from the intern who did. No one said anything to her as he was wheeled out. Just stunned silence. Corporate men in suits staring at the girl who didn't freeze when it mattered. She didn't wait for praise. Didn't linger. Just quietly slipped out the side door and walked back to her apartment, heels in hand, tears pricking the corners of her eyes. Not from fear, but from adrenaline that wouldn't settle. That night, Ethan lay in a hospital room, IV in one arm, oxygen clipped to his nose, and stared at the ceiling, his mind trying to make sense of how close he'd come to ending, and who had pulled him back. His phone buzzed. One text. "Glad you're okay. Maybe next time stick to chicken?" It was short, casual, not fishing for gratitude, not even signed. But to Ethan, it landed harder than betrayal ever had. Because it was honest, because it was real, because in a room full of people trained to protect their own image, she was the only one who protected him. And in that quiet moment, surrounded by machines and monitors, Ethan Blackwell, flawless, untouchable, and surgically distant, closed his eyes and felt something crack. Something small, something soft, something terrifying. And for the first time in a very long time, he didn't fight it. It started like most things in quiet offices do, with glances. At first, they were subtle. A second too long in the hallway. A paused sentence when she entered the break room. The kind of stares that don't shout, but murmur. Then came the change in tone. People who once greeted her with warm familiarity now offered only a cool, polite nod. There was no confrontation, just an invisible shift in temperature, like a window left open in winter. Alisa told herself it was in her head, that she was overthinking, that maybe people were just busy. But then came the first message. No name, no subject, just the words. So that's what it takes to get ahead around here. She read it 3 times before deleting it. But it stayed with her, vibrating under her skin. The second message arrived 2 days later. He always has a type. Hope you're better at playing dumb than the last one. That time, her hand trembled as she held the phone. She didn't cry. Not yet. Just sat perfectly still in a bathroom stall, staring at the grout between the tiles, wondering how a room so quiet could feel so loud. The rumors spread faster than truth ever could. A whisper in accounting, a sideways glance in the elevator, the hushed voice at the coffee station. Didn't she save his life? Followed by, yeah, and now he's inviting her to closed-door meetings. In the beginning, she tried to ignore it. She buried herself in work, answered emails faster than usual, corrected mistakes that weren't hers, stayed late but left before anyone could accuse her of lingering. But it didn't help. Every day, the air thickened with assumption. Every smile felt edged. Every silence felt loaded. And Ethan, he said nothing. No acknowledgement, no clarification, no subtle gesture of defense. He passed her in the hall like they'd never shared an elevator, like she hadn't seen him gasping for breath with shrimp venom in his lungs, like she hadn't saved him while the rest of the room froze. There were moments she caught him looking at her. Quick, measured, unreadable. But he never said her name. And so, her name became whatever the office decided it was. Opportunist, climber, maybe worse. She began to wonder if the smile he'd once given her had ever been real, if the warmth in his voice that night in the hospital had just been adrenaline, if his silence now wasn't protection, but dismissal. She told herself not to care, that she wasn't foolish enough to read into quiet moments and half-glances. But the truth is, she had cared. From the very beginning. Not because he was powerful, but because he was different with her. Or at least, she thought he was. The night it broke was cold and wet. The kind of night where New York streets glistened with oil and rain, and nothing felt solid. She had stayed late, again, under the pretense of finalizing a report that didn't need finalizing. 2 junior analysts passed behind her cubicle, laughing softly. "Did you hear?" one said. "He's engaged." "No way," the other breathed. "Since when?" "Old money. Arranged thing, I think. Family connection. Very hush-hush. But someone saw the ring last year." Alisa didn't move, didn't blink, just sat with her hands resting on her keyboard, a line of text halfway typed. She felt nothing at first, just a stillness. Then a slow, creeping chill that started in her chest and moved down her arms. Engaged. He was engaged. The words didn't fit into any of the memories she had. Not the smile in the elevator. Not the quiet text after the hospital. Not the way his eyes softened, even if only for a second, when she spoke without a filter. It didn't make sense. Or maybe it made perfect sense. Maybe the reason he never defended her wasn't fear. It was guilt. Maybe everything she thought was unique had just been a well-practiced pattern. She closed her laptop without saving the file. Left her badge on the desk. Walked out of the building with her coat still draped over her arm and her heart clenching in slow, quiet protest. On the subway ride home, she stared at the window, watching her own reflection blur against the tunnels. For the first time since stepping into Blackwell Tower, Alisa Bennett didn't feel small, or invisible, or out of place. She felt foolish, like someone who mistook a shadow for warmth, like someone who stepped into something far deeper than she was told it would be, and now couldn't find her way back out. She found him in the one place she never expected. Alone, for once, without his assistant, without a phone pressed to his ear, without the invisible shield he wore in every boardroom. He was standing in the corner of the executive lounge, his back half turned, watching the rain trail down the tall windows like it meant something. He didn't see her at first. Or maybe he did. But he didn't move. Alisa had told herself she wouldn't ask, that she didn't need answers, that she didn't want them. But when she opened her mouth, the words came out with the quiet force of something long held back. Was I just a distraction to you? Ethan turned his head slightly, just enough to look at her. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes flickered. She took a step closer. Was I a test? A game? Her voice cracked, only barely. Some bored experiment to see how the intern would react under pressure? He didn't speak. Not yet. And the silence, that damned silence, felt louder than any lie could have been. She exhaled, a shaky breath. I don't know what hurts more, that you let people say those things about me, or that you never said anything at all. Ethan's shoulders shifted, but he still didn't look away from her. I'm not engaged, he said at last. The words landed in the air like stone. I've never been engaged. It wasn't a denial shouted in defense. It was quiet, factual, plain. Alisa blinked, stunned, not by the truth, but by the fact that he waited this long to say it. Then why? She asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. Did you let me believe it? Ethan finally turned toward her fully, his face unreadable, but his eyes, those ever-controlled, unreadable eyes, held something that looked like regret. Because I needed to know, he said, what kind of person you were when everything around you started to shift. Alisa stared at him, trying to understand. I needed to know, he continued, if you could hold your own when the floor dropped out, if you could stay standing when people talked, because they would talk, they always do, especially when you don't play by their rules. So you tested me, she said, more to herself than to him. He didn't nod. He didn't need to. You let me think. Her voice faltered, pain climbing higher in her throat. You let me think I meant nothing to you. You didn't mean nothing, he said quickly, almost too quickly. You meant too much. That's the problem. She froze. That wasn't the answer she expected. And yet, it explained everything. He looked down, his voice lower now, like he was confessing something not meant to be heard. You were the only person I've met in years who didn't treat me like a title. You didn't try to win me. You didn't try to protect me. You weren't careful. He glanced back up at her. You were honest, even when it made no sense to be. And that scared you. He nodded once, silently. She stepped back a little, a hand instinctively crossing over her stomach like she needed to hold something in. Ethan, she said quietly, you don't get to use people's hearts as proving grounds. You don't get to decide if I'm strong enough for your world like it's a job interview. I know, he said. And if I hadn't been? She asked. If I had cracked under the pressure? If I had walked away? His answer came fast. Too fast. Then I would have let you. That stopped her cold. Not because it was cruel, but because it was real. Honest, a little too honest. He would have let her go to spare her the pain of being broken later. Or maybe, more truthfully, to spare himself the pain of watching it happen. She looked at him. This man who had built a fortress around his life, and invited her in just long enough to see if she could survive the cold. And for the first time, she saw him not as powerful, or composed, or strategic. She saw him as afraid of softness, afraid of mess, afraid of needing something he couldn't control. The room fell quiet again. No more accusations, no more defenses, just two people standing in the aftermath of something they never defined, trying to decide if it was already over or if it was just beginning. She didn't walk away. Neither did he. Because in the quiet, in the closeness, in the rawness of two wounded people trying to navigate something dangerously close to feeling, neither of them could. Not yet. Logan Price didn't enter the story quietly. That wasn't his style. He made his presence known with confidence, charm, and the kind of smile that looked like it came with its own press release. CEO of a fast-growing fintech firm that had been nipping at Blackwell Group's heels for 2 fiscal quarters, young, ambitious, media-savvy, and dangerous in the way only men who were both brilliant and deeply self-aware could be. He walked into a Blackwell-sponsored innovation forum wearing a navy suit that cost less than Ethan's tie, and somehow made it look bolder. He spoke on stage with calculated charisma, name-dropped just enough to establish dominance, then worked the room like he was born inside it. And then he saw her. Alisa. She was standing near the refreshments table, laughing at something one of the junior analysts said, unaware that she was about to become the object of someone else's strategy. Logan moved in, not like a shark, but like a man who knew the difference between admiration and opportunity, and had no interest in keeping them separate. He didn't waste time. "You're Alisa Bennett, right?" he asked, holding out a hand. "I've read your report on the Q2 client retraction metrics. It was surprisingly human. That's rare." She blinked, thrown off but polite. "Thank you. I wasn't sure anyone actually read those." "I did, twice, and I don't say that to flatter you," he said with a grin. "I say it because I don't like wasting time. You have instincts most people pay consultants to simulate." She didn't know what to say, so he said it for her. "I'd like to offer you a position at Hawthorne Financial." Just like that. A job, no segue, no hesitation. "Better pay, less bureaucracy, more room to build something real," he added. "We're not traditional, which I think suits you." She didn't answer right away, but her silence was enough to make someone else notice. Ethan saw them from across the room. He wasn't eavesdropping, at least not intentionally, but his eyes had always found her easily, and now they were watching her lean slightly forward, smile politely, nod in that way she did when she was listening hard. Then Logan touched her arm. It wasn't suggestive. It wasn't intimate, but it was intentional. And Ethan felt something inside him lock up. He didn't react right away. That wasn't his nature. But later that evening, after the event had ended and the lights had gone down, he found Logan by the elevators, waiting for his car service like a man who always traveled alone. "You're playing a game you don't understand," Ethan said, voice low. Logan turned, amused. "Oh, I understand the game just fine. I'm just not playing it by your rules." Ethan's jaw tightened. "She's not—" "Careful," Logan interrupted, with a cool smirk. "You don't own her, Blackwell, and she's not a title to be protected. She's a person, one who deserves to know when she's wanted, not just observed." Ethan said nothing. Logan took a step closer. "You don't see it," he said, his tone dropping to something quieter, more surgical. "She's not just smart, she's alive. She's everything you've locked out of your life, and if you don't step up, if you keep pretending your silence is strength, she'll walk, not because she's angry, but because you made it easier to leave than to stay." The car arrived. Logan stepped in. The door shut behind him with a soft click. And for the first time in years, Ethan Blackwell felt the full weight of fear. Not for the business, not for the stockholders, but for the possibility of losing someone who had become more than necessary. Because Logan was right. This wasn't about competition. It was about conviction, and Ethan, for all his calculated moves and careful restraint, had reached a point where doing nothing no longer protected him. It only exposed the truth. He had feelings for her, real ones. And now, if he wanted to keep her, he couldn't rely on silence any longer. He would have to speak, or lose her. She didn't expect him to stop her. Not really. But part of her, some stubborn, quiet, foolish part, had hoped he would. When she handed in her resignation, she didn't look him in the eye. She couldn't. Her hands were steady, her voice measured. She told herself she wasn't quitting because of him. She was leaving because the walls were getting too loud, the silence too sharp, and she couldn't keep pretending that a heart could beat normally around someone who refused to acknowledge its rhythm. Ethan didn't say anything. He read the letter, folded it neatly, nodded once. "Thank you for your time here," he said. Like she was any other intern, like 17 minutes in an elevator, and weeks of glances and late-night dancing in conference rooms, and half-spoken truths and broken silences hadn't meant anything. She walked out of his office with her head high and her chest hollow. That night, she cried. Not because she regretted leaving, but because it felt like she'd lost something she never really had the right to want. 2 days passed, quietly. Her email access was cut. Her ID card stopped working at the front gate. The world moved on. Then came the envelope. No logo. No sender. Just her name, handwritten across the front in clean, deliberate script, FedEx. Overnight, she opened it slowly, not expecting anything more than a final paycheck or an impersonal exit formality. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No letterhead, no formatting. Just typewritten words in the center of the page. Position offered, lifetime partner salary, unconditional love benefits. Include morning coffee delivered to your side of the bed, late-night dancing in sock feet, your name on every spreadsheet I'll ever make. And beneath all of that, centered at the bottom, was a signature. Ethan Blackwell. Alisa stared at it. At first, she thought it was a joke. A very expensive, very cruel joke. But the more she read it, again and again, the more she realized it wasn't a joke at all. It was a contract, a very Ethan way of saying something terrifying and beautiful, that for the first time he was choosing not to let someone walk away, that he was willing to break his own rules, that she wasn't just an experiment or a test. She was the exception, and he wanted her back, not in his company, but in his life. She laughed, the kind of laugh that cracked right through the ache she'd been holding in her chest. It wasn't graceful. It wasn't cinematic. It came out with a hiccup and half a sob. And that night, she signed her name underneath his. Not with a pen. But in a text. "I accept. But I want dental." His reply came a minute later. "Full coverage, and a lifetime supply of Post-it notes for your renamed spreadsheets." It was the beginning of something that didn't need titles or timetables, something messy and real and theirs. It was a Sunday, a quiet, rainy one, the kind of day where the world felt slower, softer, as if the sky itself had decided to exhale. Ethan was at his desk, sleeves rolled, glasses perched low on his nose, eyes scanning through the final pages of a contract he'd already memorized. The rain tapped gently against the windows of the apartment, high above the city, where sound was usually drowned in glass and distance. But today, it was peaceful, almost personal. Behind him, soft footsteps approached. Alisa didn't say anything at first. She just placed a small cardboard box on the edge of his desk. No ribbon, no note. Just a simple, unassuming box. The kind that could hold something or nothing at all. He looked up. "Before you open it," she said, folding her arms loosely across her chest, "just remember this is your fault." Ethan arched an eyebrow. My fault? She smiled. That sideways smile of hers, a little smug, a little mischievous, and all heart. He opened the box. Inside were receipts, crumpled and random. A takeout bill from a diner neither of them liked but kept going back to. A wrinkled printout from a dog shelter with a scribbled note. We can't name him Pancake, Ethan. A blurry photo of her shoes beside his under the couch. And then, tucked beneath it all, a pair of baby socks, tiny, white, rolled. Ethan didn't move. For a full breath, he just stared at them, like his brain had to catch up with what his heart already knew. Then came the laugh. Deep, unfiltered, the kind of laugh that rose from somewhere far below the ribs, untouched for years. He leaned back in his chair, hand covering his mouth, shaking his head like a man trying to process the most beautiful kind of chaos. Alisa stepped closer. You okay? He stood up, walked around the desk, stopped in front of her. The woman who had spilled coffee on him, danced barefoot in conference rooms, and quietly, without permission, rewritten the definition of home. He didn't say anything. He just pulled her into his arms. Outside the window, the rain had stopped. The city shimmered below them, fresh and rinsed and wide awake. And there they stood, not as a CEO and an intern, not as a test and a lesson, but as two people who had unraveled each other's walls, stitched them back together with laughter and patience, and somehow, without knowing when, had become a family. Sometimes, love doesn't come from roses and candlelight. Sometimes, it shows up through spilled coffee, a stuck elevator, and something called the sadness chart. But when it does, it teaches even the coldest heart how to feel again. And now, it's your turn. What did you think of this story? Do you believe love can truly begin with life's little accidents? Drop a comment below. If you were Alisa, would you forgive Ethan? And if you were Ethan, would you dare to send that contract? Rate this story from 1 to 10. We'd love to know how it made you feel. Every rating, every comment from you is what inspires us to keep telling stories that touch the heart. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you want to see more stories.